Well, yeah, good afternoon, everybody. It's great, and thank you for giving us a chance to discussing our upcoming proposal here. Yeah, I would second that it has been a true pleasure to work with Brahmaji. So I've been 9 years in Michigan. So I'm a medical school faculty, 50% in BME and 50% in vascular surgery. My background really is in fluid dynamics, so computational mechanics, CFD, computational fluid dynamics, and really always focus on blood flow, trying to understand blood flow from medical images and from other hemodynamic measurements that we might get in the clinic. So Brahmaji and I started working together maybe 5 years ago, 6 years ago now, with a common PhD student who did wonderful things, kind of started this area of work. And then since then, we've been kind of adding people to this task, because you realize that if you want to make a difference, you need such high level degree of expertise in areas of the work that seem very close, but they actually require very unique expertise. So besides the two of us, there's other faculty from mechanical engineering and from computer science who continue to help us and continue to get excited about trying to crack these difficult problems, right? And so Haiju Yan, which is here on the call today, is a postdoc in mechanical engineering that is working part-time in my lab and part-time in the lab of one of our collaborators, who's faculty mechanical engineering. So yeah, thank you for hosting us today. And yeah, I'm gonna follow Brahmaji's lead as far as the mechanics of the hour. So
yeah, so this is a great group. I think what we try to do is really focus, especially on these internal sessions, about how well and effective we are at kind of communicating some of our science. I think this group has been really wonderful at kind of pointing out sometimes discrepancies between like how we're thinking of things and then what we're actually expressing on paper, especially around kind of the clarity of our ideas. And so that's kind of the format of this type of session. So Alberto, I'm going to start a little bit to kind of educate everybody here about the problem. But even before that, tell us a little bit about, so this is going to go in as an R01, correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
What study section is it targeting? And tell us a little bit about what you know about that study section.
Yeah, so as you know, you may have a target in mind. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to end up there, which is a big challenge, right? So, but this is kind of my go-to study section. Is called MABS, M-A-B-S. That stands for Modeling and Analysis of Biological Systems. And it's a study section that tries to strike a balance between biological applications. They can be very broad. So there's people doing cancer work, some neuroscience work, basically all over the place. But kind of a key defining factor of that study section is that there have to be novel computational methods. So computational methods, AI methods. If you are using tools that, albeit advanced, are perceived as established to do an analysis, you will get bounced off. So, there's a very important component of, it's a delicate balance between pushing for the development of new tools, and at the same time, of course, they like it very much that you use real patient data. I would say more so than animal work and things like that. So all of my R01s have come from there. When I have not been successful is because my work has been perceived like it didn't have enough of a technical, successful meaning in getting it there. It didn't have enough of a technical novelty, even if, still relies on the same tools. So that's why I think this can be, we have a good chance at getting it accepted there, because it has a very heavy machine learning component, model order reduction, besides the validation part of clinical data.
Can you teach the group a little bit about how you think as an experienced investigator about how getting a grant into a targeted study section? And I'm going to ask a couple of other folks on this call too, how they do it as well. Do you do that in your cover letter? What's the strategy you use?
I write a cover letter where you express your preference, right? Then there's also these AI website where you enter your abstract. And I think they look into that. I mean, that's something that you can do yourself, right? You enter the abstract, and on the spot, the website processes the language that you use is natural language process algorithm, and it kind of gives you a number of study sections, right? From very strongly likely to maybe possible and so on. At the end of the day, people decide. Somebody's going to decide, right? And I mean, I can tell you an anecdote, like a very established investigator, kind of my closest collaborator, really. I had several R01s with him. He's the former chair of BME at Yale, very senior person. We were submitting a new extension for a grant, right? And we had always been in these maps study section. And this time it had a lot more clinical work. It really did. It's actually with Bank and other people here. And then, we submitted it and we get the study section that I look at it and I know nobody, not a single person in the study section. And I'm like, uh-oh. I ask him and he's like, I don't know a single person either. And maybe I shouldn't say this here to this audience, but I really thought I'm gonna pull the grant, because if you don't know anybody, and even someone who's even much more senior than you doesn't know anybody in that study section, I think it's virtually impossible that they will recognize what you're trying to say. So I felt bad, and I didn't dare saying this to him, right? Because he's gonna think, oh, you're trying to trick the system. So I told him, what should we do? And he said, he's a very, man of faith, let's put it this way. So he says, well, we're going to have to just wait and pray. And I'm like, okay. So sure enough, we wait, we pray, we get the scores back sevens. Like we got like sevens on the grant. Okay, like absolutely atrocious. And he's floored. And he's like, this is the first time one of my grants does not get discussed. And I'm like, okay, I didn't dare saying I could have told you that, right? But I mean, so now our plan is, if you see something like that happening, is I think virtually impossible that you get it through. So in that case, you really have to, in my opinion, you really have to just change the grant in some way, right? Like you need to make it so that whomever is going to look at that, it's going to maybe put it more towards what is advantageous to you. Right? So either outcomes or computational or whatever.
Yeah. Well, you always have the option of becoming a Hindu. That's why reincarnation of grants is definitely a good skill set. I'm gonna take a moment, because this has happened more than once in the last few years now, where I could tell you friends have sent in grants, and part of it's because the splintering of study sections has grown. I'm curious, like we've got some experienced people here. If Mike Mathis or Mike Ho or Vinod, do you guys have any thoughts about this? Any strategies you've used successfully? Because it used to be you just kind of put it in the cover letter and people were like, eh. And I actually wonder if what Alberto's talking about, this tool, literally, I think that the SRAs, that's all they do, and then they just go with it, and that can be a big problem if you're not anticipating. And they also do it because of balance, right? You can't have like 1,000 grants in one section and 5 in another, and I think that plays part of a role. Mathis, did you have a thought?
Yeah, I do think that tool, I forget the name of it off the top of my head, but yeah, making sure that when you copy and paste your abstract or specific games or what have you into that, that your study section does come near the top. I do think that is useful. And if you're not seeing it there, you have to figure out what keywords might get it closer. That being said, I also had a a recent R01 submission that and again I'm a junior investigator, like or I guess was very recently relinquished my early stage investigator status, but when I see a study section and nobody knows me, that's just every study section. That's not a specific study, that's not a specific concern I have yet. But I did submit a recent R01 where it went to a study section that I'm blanking on the name of the study section that I had intended to go to versus where it went. It was different, and knew very few people on the study section, but it did get funded, or it's got a 3rd percentile score, and I'll find out in the next 2 weeks. But so not to be too contrarian to Alberto, but maybe take your 0 out of 1 to a 1 out of 2 for study sections that know little about you getting successfully funded.
Yeah. All right.
But I don't know. I mean, again, I think that much of that might still just be the early stage of status, and I do think it's worthwhile to at least use that search tool and make sure that your study section is near the top.
Yeah. No, it's definitely it's becoming more and more, and like I said, part of it's because it used to be just a couple of different study sections for much of our work, and now there's just so many that are out there, and there are these nuanced differences that I think many of us don't even appreciate sometimes, but it is a critical part of making sure the right people are reviewing your work. Any other thoughts about that? We can move on, obviously, to Vinod. Did you have something?
I was going to add that we probably should not know too many people in the study section too, because then you'll go into a special emphasis panel or something like that. Then you can completely get a new set of people, which has happened to me like 2 times. And I don't like that, because then you cannot really go back to the same study section. You get different people.
Yeah.
One other thing I'll offer is one of my experiences was just writing a response to it was a resubmission that it got funded on, and it was a different study section on the resubmission, which was again distressing to me. But in my response to reviewers page, I did a lot of reminding in that page of what the previous study section had said, and I kind of just embedded that. So I think if it's a response, if it's your resubmission, then there has to be a lot of reminding of what was discussed at the first study section, I think, in your kind of intro to revised aims.
For sure. So, all right. Well, what we're going to do here at this point is I think that, we know that like Alberto and my idea is super fantastic. We already know that, right? We just don't know if we're expressing it really well on paper. And so I'm going to give you guys a couple minutes to just refresh yourself. I'm going to put my timer on, but it's always very helpful to kind of go through the aims page, I think. So I'm going to write for 3 minutes, let you guys read through it, and then we'll come back here on Zoom on the other side, okay? Welcome back, everybody. And I think that it's useful sometimes to kind of start with just some general impressions. With those general impressions and stuff, sometimes we focus on kind of motivation for the study. Like, are we clear about what the problem is and where the gaps are? And then moving on to kind of like the aims themselves and the specificity of the work plan. And obviously this is just the aims page, but kind of delving a little bit into that and giving us some feedback about kind of an emphasis. Oh, and by the way, I just want to say this, he's not here, but I don't know if you guys remember, Rohan Kara came and presented some work to us, and he just texted me he's going to send MiCHAMP a bottle of scotch, which is like our fee, but his R01 just got funded and it got like a crazy score, like a 10 or something like that. And so he's very grateful for everyone participating. But again, I think what was really helpful about that session, I remember afterwards, was just him understanding a little bit more around the clarity of his own ideas and thoughts, which I think weren't being that clear. So, all right, so I'm going to just start with some general impressions. I'm going to call on many of you because you're my friends, and I'm going to pick on the cardiologists up front. So, Mike, do you have any kind of general thoughts about this as you read through it?
Yeah, I think the setup could be a little more clear, because oftentimes I thought it kind of contradicted itself as far as like, you know, whether angiography provided helpful information or not. And so, yeah, I thought, and then the other thing I thought was it seemed very, it seemed like it was written for a cardiology audience, or, you know, you had to have some minimum amount of cardiology knowledge to understand. And it's not clear to me that that's necessarily the study section that it's going to. And so I think probably explaining things more upfront would be helpful. And then it also, the other thing is, and I don't know how much preliminary data, or I mean, there's not a lot of introduction about the modeling and the computational models in those introductory paragraphs, and it would be nice to kind of foreshadow that a little bit more before the aims. You know, to say, well, we've done some of this, or, you know, we can do this, and this is how we've done it in the
before you see it. Yeah, before you see it in the aims themselves. Yeah. Yep. Mike, what do you think? Do you think we've set up the problem very well or very clearly at the end of, like, do you feel like you're, because I think this is great feedback. I think especially starting for the non-cardiology audience, and I'd be curious about the non-cardiology audience. Was it even more confusing? Like, Mathis, did you understand what the problem was we were trying to settle on, or?
I think, I mean, I don't know. Yeah, somewhere in between the non-cardiology audience and the
Cardiac
cardiology. Yeah,
yeah, for sure.
I think so. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, yeah, this is just all about what study section it goes to. And I mean, the first paragraph you hear here is just teaching people of the terminology, which you probably do have to do. Although I don't know if it's just the technical, like, I wonder if in the first paragraph of your specific games, there's a little bit of underscoring of the public health relevance of some of this, rather than just educating everybody on the acronyms. But yeah, I mean, it's tough. Yeah, I mean, I do think this is the sense of the public health relevance of this problem isn't yet fully conveyed, I think, in the first couple paragraphs. And so I think underscoring that for the non-cardiologist audience would be important.
Yeah. Jesse, can I ask you kind of your thoughts on this?
My disclosure is I couldn't find the specific aims page, so Chris just emailed it to me. So
we'll let you read through it.
I'll follow up.
Yeah. Any other kind of thoughts about, like, just the setup a bit? I think that, Mike, those comments are really spot on. Alberto, do you have a reaction to kind of Mike's comments, or?
No, I agree. I fully subscribe everything you said, Mike. I really think they are spot on. You know, I can think of places and trade-offs that I can make. You know, definitely the lack of technical details is clear. There's only like 2 or 3 sentences. And perhaps there's, you know, too much detail on some of the acronyms. You end up using, you know, a few lines of text. I think the idea really is to explain the difference between large vessel versus small vessel. That's important. Explain all the lack of one-stop shop where you're going to need multiple procedures to assess large and small. And at the same time, going to Mike's point, which I agree, the public health issues, maybe not as coming up. We have a procedure that is done millions of times per year that you get very little out of it, right? So that would be kind of the public health need, besides getting a unified method that potentially can give you large and small. But yeah,
can I ask you something just to build on what Mike had said? When we've gone back and forth about this, sometimes I feel like there's so much in here, right? And what I mean by that is, and I just want to get like the reactions of the group here. I think this is written currently as like being able to explore better large vessel hemodynamic issues, right? So being able to do that in a better way, without adding extra to the procedure, but then also looking at microvascular disease or small vessel disease. So I think we're proposing both. One thing I worried about, like when I just listening to Mike, but then also is it can be very confusing because we go back and forth between those. And I wonder and I'd love to hear what some of the people here on this call, especially you, Michael, like think about this, like, is it enough? Like, I think that's probably enough just to focus on the small vessel side, to like start with the public health relevance of like, millions of these procedures are done for symptomatic disease. But what we know is in more than 50% of patients who undergo this procedure, they don't find epicardial disease, right? They actually have minimal epicardial disease. And what's been proposed increasingly is that there's actually microvascular disease that's hidden. But we can't really get at that unless we do really expensive tests like PET or like invasive tests, where we drop a wire down there and do flow measurements. And without that, we're really stuck because these tests just are not done. I mean, they're not even done at the University of Michigan, let alone, let alone at like a community center. And then to say that the angiogram holds this like really impressive information about flow, and what we're going to do is focus on that. I mean, to me, it's like the rise of microvascular disease is like an area of attention. Seems like it's enough. And I don't know if that makes it a simpler story than trying to go back and forth. Maybe some reactions from you guys, and then see what Alberto thinks.
Yeah, I think that makes that flows very well, right? Because you're saying there's a lot of additional data that we're not taking advantage of in these procedures that we're doing. And then we don't need to do more procedures. We could just leverage the data that we've collected on the current angiogram to find out all of these things. And then, maybe the next step is then talk about some of the preliminary work that then, will set up the aims.
I liked that reframing a lot too. Having now made it through the first couple of paragraphs, I agree with the comments on like the definitions, and I think that would allow you to get away from using all those definitions in the first paragraph around MINOCA and ANOCA. And then I think the other thing that didn't come through to me in my quick read is like why the diagnostic yield is so low for coronary angiography. And I think your reframing kind of helps address some of that, because that's like the whole crux of the argument.
I think I have a question along those lines for people who know about cardiology. But when you were reframing it, I liked it a lot. And I also thought then there would be more room to explain what was technically innovative. And I'm hung up now on the study section being maps. And I see a lot of interest in kind of reduced order models. So I was wondering if that was where you thought the major technical innovation was, because you do talk about it in two of the aims, and so I wanted to see if it would also be kind of addressed as, like you were saying, for MAPS, it needs to be health and it needs to be the methodological innovation. And I thought that was it, but I wasn't entirely sure.
Yeah, we want to switch to that idea. So that's great. Alberto, do you want to respond maybe to the reaction about just the microvascular piece, and then I move to Enrique's, because we've got like, several people on this call, like Vinod, for example, who I'd love to get his comments on some of the methods as well.
No, I actually really like this a lot. I think for people who know about these, they understand that the issues in the microcirculation. And if you make it more focused from the get-go, it's going to simplify that first half of the page that you spent a lot of time making it sound like it's, both evenly contributing to the issue, right? So I really like that, actually. And if you frame it like that, I can see that it's going to be greatly simplified. It's a lot more focused from the start. The reason, of course, we didn't do it that way is because we so far have spent most of the work on epicardial research, but we have very good preliminary data, obviously, for now switching to Enrique's question, which is not published yet, but we have plenty of preliminary data, right, for how can you extract information on coronary microvascular health from the angios. So I think that's why I think that we have a good chance that we'll get into this study section, because there's a lot of technical developments that will be needed, both in terms of high fidelity models that are very expensive, that allow you to ultimately correlate the shape of the contrast intensity curve that you get from the angios. How is that connected to microvascular resistance? So this is what these models give you. But of course, these models are very expensive, and you want to be able to, for clinical applicability, to have reduced order models, data-driven machine learning that can make that connection fast. So, but this is wonderful, guys. I really think we will benefit a lot in terms of clarity and focus, just making it about the microcirculation.
Yeah, I think as long as people like Mike and Jesse and Mike Mathis, microcirculation is becoming such a huge and hot topic area. I think that, building in that public health relevance, for example, that Mathis talked about, I think that's an easy way. I don't think anyone will leave this thinking that, in fact, in some ways, it might exhaust people to say, oh, you're developing another test for epicardial disease. We already have all these other tests, right? Anatomic or functional. But I really like that. So that again, very appreciative, what Alberto said. Alberto, do you want to walk us through the aims in the structure? And I'm curious, just if you could give us just a brief, how you're thinking of it. I'd love to get the reaction of the folks here. Particularly I'd love to see how Vinod thinks about this, especially as we build up this, because I know that we're building up kind of the modeling, and then we have this clinical small piece right at the end. But do you want to walk us through how you're thinking this?
Yeah. Can I use slides for this?
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, of course, none of us have this luxury of telling our reviewers, let me explain this to you vis-a-vis.
Yeah.
So, okay, sure. Can you see my screen now?
Yep.
All right, so that aim one is really about developing a model that ultimately will allow us to connect information from the angiograms with microvascular resistance parameters. Okay, that's the goal. And it has two parts. It has the part A that will rely on a high fidelity model, and part B, which is going to be very expensive, but full of physics. And then part B will be a reduced order model that can do the analysis in a clinically relevant time frame. So the idea behind these is for everybody, but especially the cardiologists. So hopefully this plays. Okay. Is it playing on your screen?
It is now.
Yeah. So what you see here are two angios, two videos for two patients on the left. Then right next to it, you see our segmentation algorithm that tells you how the contrast agent moves through the vessels, frame by frame. And then on the right, you see for each of these two movies, you basically plot the histogram of pixels that are occupied by the contrast agent over the different frames. So what this tells you is that patient one has a very rapid filling and a very rapid emptying of the contrast agent. And patient two has much slower filling and emptying. So the first time.
Could I add one context to some of the clinicians in the audience? So these are both patients who've had stenting for a STEMI. So they had a complete occlusion, and then they had reperfusion, and then this is their post-stent angiogram, just to let you guys know. So, you know, and we the reason I mention that for others is that, you know, basically a STEMI is like a complete blockage, right? So imagine this vessel's cut off, and then we've reopened it. And we've known clinically for a long time that, like, you know, when you look at it just visually, the people who have a very slow runoff, you're worried because you're like, oh, I opened up the big blood vessel, but the diseased microvasculature is just not handling it, and they're not going to do well. That's like a common clinical pearl that people will teach all the time. And yeah, so anyway, that's the context of why this is so striking for many people who live in this clinical space.
So with these curves, if you look at these two videos, you can see that white stays a lot longer in this bottom patient. So that kind of is consistent with this much broader. And these are normalized intensity curves, so they are both relative to a maximum value, whatever maximum value. So the first time we looked into this, we realized, oh, you know, there might be some hidden information about the microcirculation in these videos. And then we had a resident working with Brahmaji and I, and he basically did a cohort of 100 plus STEMI patients. And he was basically looking at this information. And what you see here is just the ascending slope and the descending slope. For clarity, we cannot break it down. And you really see, and this is like strong preliminary data for this grant, you really see the dramatic variability in the rate of uptake and then the rate of washout of the contrast agent, right? So this really tells you about, you know, in a population that is rather homogeneous, how variable it can be, right? So the question.
Oh, go ahead.
Please go ahead.
Oh, what I was going to say is, I think that's great context for this. I wonder if, like, with, you know, because we've got like 10, 15 minutes left, I'm wondering, can you go back to the Ames page, Alberto? Because I want to get folks' reactions to how they felt, like, with that kind of as background, because I know that that's something we'll go into in more detail. Like, when you look at these Ames, and in particular, I'm curious, especially for people who do a lot of development work, like, you know, I'm just going to propose something, and just, again, this is just as a discussion, because I think that, Alberto, you know, you've talked a little bit about the heavy kind of high computational, high fidelity model, the very expensive one. And then there's the reduced order model. Like, an alternative way of thinking about this is you really have 4 Ames here, right? Because you have Aim 1A, you're calling it 1B, but it almost seems like there's a ton of work there. And I wonder if that's a better Aim 2. And then I don't know how much of the advantage of the calibration plus testing, like, you could see a 3A and 3B. But I'm wondering, how do you, you know, maybe get other people's reactions about this? And then, Alberto, you know the work in this, especially from a computational standpoint, and maybe it makes more sense to say 1A and 1B. But Vinod, do you have kind of thoughts about this as you structure, kind of like when you do a lot of model development work?
Right. Yes, I think so when I read it the first time, I kind of this amount of work that would probably be needed for 1A and 1B appeared to be very large to all fit in one aim. So I'm glad that you kind of pointed it out too, because it appears that if you separate it out, then there is less reliance of one aim into the other kind of approach too. So you can kind of think about two different ways of kind of approach doing it in aim 1 and aim 2, and then maybe evaluating the model and calibration could go into each of those aims as you develop a model and calibrate it, you develop this model and calibrate it, and then you validate it on a machine learning framework. I feel that seems to be maybe better way, but I'm kind of curious to know about your reasoning for the way you had set it up now. But in any case, even with that, I think the main takeaway of what that would develop or kind of showing the scale of what a high fidelity model is and versus a reduced model, something more quantitative about why that is important in a high with these many features and what that would give you and how that can be reduced may also be important. So I think that's the two points that I had.
Yeah, again, this is a very good point. I mean, just to be brief, 90% of the work is in part 1B.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we have the high fidelity model. I mean, we can do a few more things with it to understand, right? To understand, yeah, basically what affects the shape of those curves, you know, in terms of regionality, differences between right side and left side. So there's some work to be done there. But all the novelty is, and that's basically Haiju's, which is here on the call, Haiju's work, who's an expert on this model order reduction. 90% of AIM1 really is the reduced order model.
Right. And
we
I
have
yeah.
the high fidelity model. We're going to show preliminary data with that.
Right. I think we kind of got that because I thought that was it, but when you read it, you don't actually say it. So we kind of knew it maybe if you're in that space, but you don't really say that at all.
No, yeah. It makes it sound that we may not have the model. But we
Yes.
do. The reason I put that, Brahmaji, to add more layers of complexity, that's where I was thinking about adding JJ Park. That's why I try to inflate it. You know, there's another professor. So that's kind of the reason. But I think that's really secondary compared to you know, the clarity of how much work is needed and versus what has already been done.
What do you could you give folks a sense, because I know you've shared this with me a little bit, like, you know, so what's been really interesting, like kind of working with Alberto, is he thinks of things in a very systematic way of like you can model perfection, right? I mean, it's that idea of like, you know, the model can have everything in the world, but it'll come at a cost. And then these ideas of like reduced order models. So do you want to spend just a minute, Alberto, just talking through with people, like what does that mean from an intuitive sense?
Yeah. So it's far from perfection, but yeah. So let me show you what a high fidelity model for us looks like. So it's a model that will necessitate anatomy of the coronary arteries of a patient, either from angios or from CT. We will be simulating blood flow. We will be simulating contrast injection. And we have models for ventricular function and for the microcirculation. So, you know, each of these branches, at the end of them, there's a model that has resistors, capacitors, and that basically tells you high resistance, higher than normal, or lower compliance, lower than normal. So that's a high fidelity model. I'm going to show you the way it works. Bear with me, my computer is very slow.
I do wonder, Alberto, if like, keeping, I think because 1B is so important, like having that as a standalone aim makes a lot of sense. I wonder if aim 1 becomes, we say we have preliminary data on the model that we've created, but again, that's in 100 people and that's all STEMI patients. But what we can do is maybe say we will look at this in, like in stable coronary artery disease patients that make up the bulk of these, as well as other types of patients. As you said, then also expanding it from the right coronary artery to the left coronary artery. Those are like non-trivial. You're right. That's not the bulk of the new science, but and then that way aim 2 can stand alone with this reduced order model.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so here you see these are the flow physics at the top. So they are three-dimensional, that's velocity, that's pressure, pulsatile solutions. This is the simulation of the contrast injection. So you can actually see the dye being injected here and traveling through the vessels. This is our simulated counterpart of how the contrast travels down the vasculature. And this is our computational reconstruction of that contrast intensity curve. So this is a very expensive model, meaning that to run these, it's going to take like many hours, like maybe 10 hours on, Great Lakes. It's one of the computers here on campus. But at the end of the day, you just want to be able to connect the shape of those curves with some parameters of the microcirculation. That's what you want to do, right? The shape of this curve, at the end of the day, it is dictated by these parameters that we can choose and we can learn what they mean. So yeah, I mean, I think it's I'm not sure how to focus the work on the reduced order model, but I think it's clear that it needs to be done that way. Yeah. And I don't know if that's, in rigor and reproducibility, that you can put a lot of things in there. In rigor and reproducibility, you can use that as, a space to really elaborate your high fidelity model.
Yeah.
Really convince people that you have the tool to do that kind of analysis.
Yeah, I think that, I wonder if like, I kind of like Vinod's idea too. What's your reaction to like having kind of calibration throughout it too? Like having a cohort that, we do the high fidelity, it's going to come at a huge computational cost, but we have time, right? Like we do that and then we validate that, and then in aim 2 with the reduced order model, same kind of thing. And then in the third one, we have a prospective aim where we're collecting data.
So can you repeat that again? So aim 3, we leave it the way it is, right? That's going to be the prospective with the gold standard with a coral wire.
Yeah. But aim 1, we say we develop this computational model kind of in a theoretical framework, and we calibrate it with like data from, 100 patients, right? And then aim 2, we, try to create some reduced order model that maintains like the accuracy of that fully computational model. But what we do is we calibrate that with, again, data from the same cohort of patients. And then in aim 3, we try to validate these models kind of prospectively in, maybe 25 patients or so.
Okay, yeah. So aim 1 is to develop and calibrate the high fidelity model, basically calibrate the high fidelity model with 100 patient STEMI data. Aim 2 is about developing the reduced order model. This really lowers the interdependability as well, because we can certainly calibrate the high fidelity.
Yeah,
so,
exactly. Yep.
And I wouldn't discount. I know that we have the model kind of started and stuff, but I think that there is some development work that needs to be done, and maybe it's.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Just
I agree. I wouldn't say the first one is just to calibrate the high fidelity model. To kind of say to develop and calibrate the high fidelity model, I think would be important, even though you have prior work that, because you're going to tune it more.
Yeah.
But this is amazing, guys. I mean, of course, I shouldn't expect anything less, but these are really amazing suggestions.
Oh, no, they're a great group. We're gonna owe them because you're Spanish, we're gonna owe them sangria instead of Scotch, but it'll be fun. Mike, what were you gonna say?
Well, I had a quick question for you. I mean, I guess for these, does it matter the speed of injection of the dye? I mean, or are you using automatic injectors so the speed is the same every time?
Yeah, that is such a good question. So I'm pretty sure it matters. And as I'm sure you know better than me, the norm is to just do it manually, right? There is equipment to do it in a controlled way. But Brahmaji, you are the expert on this.
No, 100%. That injection looked like a Jessie Golbis injection from her first year, you know. So we have, you know, it can be quite variable for sure. And we've talked a little bit about this. There's a struggle about this. You know, this is not going to be perfection. You know, Mike, the other thing too is that in many of these studies, you know, you get rid of like microvascular resistance with like adenosine as well. And that's not going to be an option in many of these cases. And so I think what we're trying to do at the end of the day is maybe we might not find a perfect solution, but something that is not throwing away all this rich data that's included in these angiograms around flow. But that's a great point.
I wonder in AIM-3, I don't, because I guess in our labs, I think they're using an automatic injector so that it's, you know, at least for the validation cohort, you're saying the injection rate is the same for all of these patients.
In fact, we should probably do that. And then we've actually talked with a couple of labs, like one is abroad, where they will routinely give adenosine as well. And we could probably talk to them about a protocol for like, you know, again, a couple of dozen patients to give adenosine and nitroglycerin before a set of injections for patients who are undergoing, you know, a standard coronary angiogram. So, and the assist device, like you said, Mike. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I had a question about since you brought this up. I'm trying to go through my notes, but Brahmaji, you're gonna remember. Oh yeah, I have it right here. So for that, it's a coral wire, the one that has the comprehensive assessment. You had mentioned that we should talk to people in Michigan West and Sparrow because we just don't have enough use of that system here. Will that make it even harder to expect that they also have these assist injector there? I mean,
I think, you know, I forget what the use is. It's interesting, Mike. Mike says that Colorado does. There are some colleagues there. There's some colleagues at a couple of other places that use these injectors as well. And what we might want to do is for the validation piece, you know, if this gets funded, we'll have like 3 or 4 years to figure out what lab we're going to get this from. But we'll probably, especially since we're doing this as a prospective data collection, what I'd imagine is we could tag on to studies that are, you know, doing these full evaluations hemodynamically of patients who have angina and no coronary artery disease. There's a number of these cohorts that are growing, and all we would need to do is actually just collect the angiogram from them, you know. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, you know, there's a number of groups now that are collecting data prospectively on patients who have some type of angina but have no coronary artery disease, and then they do these functional tests where they'll drop a wire down there, they'll give medicines, they'll do all this stuff. And what we can do is all we need is really just the angiograms from those studies. So, but we can talk a little bit more about that. But I think Mike's point about the standardizing the injections is really important. So, all right. Well, I think we all got to get going on to the next set of things. Thank you guys, as always, so helpful. You know, we're really appreciative of this. And I don't know, Alberto, if you have final words.
No, I'm incredibly thankful. Very insightful comments. So I hope I can help somebody in the future by reading someone else's R01. So sign me up.
You have to pay it back. pay
Yeah.
for. Okay, all right.